Hi everyone, and welcome to the State of AI, the update of the first quarter of 2026. My name is Matias Concha. I'm a scout in VC industry, and I want to share what I'm looking and perceiving as signal within the AI industry. So, without further ado, what I'm seeing here is that AI adoption is actually accelerating and not really plateauing. So this is the first thing, and the second is as the most companies and enterprise actually adopt it, the mandate actually is going for performance. Is it deriving value, but it's also going to cost efficiency? Are we actually getting it right? I think data quality and context are going to become key, as these are one of the layers that companies can actually control. And then I will cover throughout main geopolitical, technology, consumer, enterprise, and some of the investment trends that I'm seeing in this State of AI report. So let's go with the world of politics. So the first of all is that the AI race is actually stalemate. So China and the US are quite tight, in my opinion. But China has unlocked what I like to call long-term enablers of the technology. And there's been some serious progress, but it's coming with risk. So if you look the AI race, China is actually quite ahead in some of the enablers, like for example, energy productions and raw material access. On the other side, the EU is quite ahead in chips and semiconductors, but I think they're quite on par in a lot of the indicators. Of course, there's just a bunch of them, but then there's no clear lead if you ask me. I think the gap has significantly narrowed, and then I will go into the next slide, which I think is basically as the US-centric foreign policy has become more evident around the world, China has really accelerated their efforts to become independent from US technology. So when you look like how does this look, China has really tried to build an open source ecosystem. So most of the open source launches around AI models has been Chinese. And if you look like top of the open weights models, they're all Chinese, or most of them that are Chinese. This which one are the light blues. In the top performance are closed models from the US, but the gap is quite narrowing. And since roughly half of 2025, what has happened is that China has actually taken the lead into become the world producer of open weight models. And as you can see in these graphs, most of this adoption has really taken care around Quen. And I would say that most of the open source models actually today coming from China. The EU has really lost their edge, and the US it's getting narrower and narrower and narrower every single month that goes by. I think one of the points that really favors China around this is that they are the top trade partner of the world. So in the 2000 was the US, and today is China. So it wouldn't be so surprising if China start to exert some influence around countries to adopt their open weight models and to build on top of Chinese infrastructure, especially because this part of the world actually do not really have any frontier model on their own. So they will become model takers, not model developers, at least not in the short term. And even Southeast Asia and Australia do not necessarily have tons of options. So this is something that I definitely would consider that happens. So as you might recall, NVIDIA actually banned chips, and it was not only NVIDIA, but it was the US government. And because of that, this accelerated the development of Huawei chips. So basically, since the ban happened, China actually banned on the other side tech companies to actually buy NVIDIA chips. And this was quite a thing in my opinion, because if you get this confident, this means that you're really confident on Chinese capabilities of really building top tier infrastructure in-house. And this is not only me, but Andrew Ng has basically stated the same in one of his Twitter, in one of the tweets of his account. Moreover than that, actually, if you go and look a little bit deeper on these super intelligence teams built on top US tech companies, these teams like Meta is actually quite Chinese. Some of these people have let go at this point in time, but still it's roughly 2/3 of the team are actually coming from Chinese origin. And if we look a little bit deeper, actually the researchers that actually developed DeepSeek, most of them are Chinese, but not more surprisingly, roughly more than half never leave China or never had any external train um, outside of Chinese institutions, which is quite relevant because this means that China is actually building a top tier muscle to develop frontier AI talent. And then on the other side, the US is actually driving several visa restrictions, and this has led to the top AI authors and investors to relocate in other places, right? So in 2025, actually, the inflow of talent to the US has decreased quite sharply around these topics. China, in my view, has really become an innovation powerhouse. So it's not only about AI. AI is one of many verticals, but it's also strong in semiconductors, quantum, biotech, space technology. So it's one of the two countries that really is on the top of critical technologies. And not only that, but China is also one of the main countries that had access to rare earth elements, which are basically the input materials or raw input materials for advanced technologies such as AI, for example. So when we look on what is going on China and the energy output, in the words of Jensen Huang, is actually quite ahead. So China is actually doing basically more electricity, or is generating more electricity than EU, India, and the US all combined. So China can really grow in terms of artificial intelligence because this is the main barrier, is actually electricity to power compute at the very end of the day. And if we look what is going on with the progress, I think this is going quite up in terms of different indicators that we'll see in a few minutes, but with risk. And the first risk is what they call incidents. So these incidents are going on in an ongoing basis. Doesn't really matter which chart or which report are we looking. There are more and more incidents year after year. And what are these incidents looking like? It's basically, cybersecurity incidents that, clone retailers' website and do fraud or impersonate people or potentially create anti-Semitic posts and racism. So all these situations are happening more often as AI is being rolled out. The second problem or risk that I see is the transparency. So most of these models actually are quite obscure in how they work. And this is leading some worry around regulators and also companies that are being users of these models. And then the third risk that I see is that it's going to change potentially the opinion towards AI. So if we look, for example, one survey still is quite positive in terms of the opinion of AI, which is Ipsos. But then if we look another, which is Pew Research, is actually showcasing the opposite. So we are starting to see a change in some of the surveys on concern about AI. And one of the drivers, in my opinion, of this concern is actually the impact on the job market. So if we take, for example, the Stanford AI Index, they measure how most of these countries actually perceive the job market itself after AI, and most of them are bearish. And then in the same case, how do they perceive, how individuals perceive their own jobs? And most of them, they were also bearish. So in a nutshell, I think everyone it's a bit it's a bit bearish on the job market and the individual positions at this point in time. And if we take the same index, but now the responses for will AI create or eliminate jobs, not only adults, but also AI experts both believe that most of the effect of AI rollout is going to be fewer jobs. So this is the sentiment today. And as this sentiment is actually rolling out, I believe the public opinion around AI will actually change. One of the segments where this is starting to become evident is actually software developers. So The demand for software developer actually has grown steadily in the last year, but there is a group of software developers that is actually being less and less and less employed, which is the software developers in their early careers. My interpretation around this is that earlier software engineers have the technical background, but lack of context and experience, and therefore this puts them in some sort of similar ground to very powerful models such as Cloud Code and so on. So the ones who are really valuable are the ones in their mid-careers that basically have the context and the technical expertise to build different automations and workflows. And in the meantime, the third point is that OpenAI has launched what they call this industrial policy for intelligence age, which is at the very end of the day how to distribute prosperity of AI, how to create safeguards, and how to democratize access. My interpretation of this is that they are seeing this trend that the public opinion around AI will shift, and therefore they are putting themselves ahead by creating this consensus for the intelligence age before it's too late and it's hard for a politician to back up or a group of politicians to back up these initiatives. So on technology side, capabilities keep accelerating. So this is actually still on the rise. I believe context engineering and semantic understanding will be a key topic because they are largely unaddressed. This means basically that the number of parameters in the model is still growing at an exponential level. So they are not plateauing, but actually accelerating or still keeping the momentum. Compute performance is actually also increasing at the same time. So this means basically that chips are getting better and better and better. And what we're seeing is that main tech providers are actually increasing their budgets in compute. This means the amount of compute power that they will use from cloud providers to actually inference and use AI. So this means momentum at the very end of the day. As I said before, the hardware is getting better and better and better. Just for you to have an understanding, chips have become 225x faster and better in the last 8 years, and this is only powering AI momentum. But there's problems as AI scales. So the first problem is energy consumption. So if you take into average, like how much energy in terms of consumption were models in 2023 and then 2024 and then 2025, the energy consumption is actually on the rise, which drives a more complex situation to really adopt it. And this is despite the energy efficiency that has been gained on the chip maker side. So the energy efficiency side has happened, but it's just not as fast as the compute that is needed to actually offset this example. And then the second problem that is happening is that there's going to be a tough conversation around efficient inference management. And I think there's going to be new metrics. So for example, tokens per watt or cost per token and so on. I'm going to come at a CEO level metrics. This means basically that a company, doesn't really matter which one, it's going to have a new OPEX line that could be at a variable cost or in the SG&A. But it's going to be the cost of computing times the quantity of computing. So this is basically what you use. If you use AI a lot, then you will have this equation a little bit larger. So the cost of computing has decreased exponentially since the launch of early days of AI. But the quantity of computing has increased drastically. So in a Princeton research release just over a few weeks, they estimated that the reasoning models were basically using roughly 113 times more compute and therefore API cost than a regular standard LLM such as ChatGPT non-reasoning models. And what is driving this quantity of computing? This is tokens. What are tokens? So tokens are, as you might recall, when you prompt something, all these words or fraction of words are called tokens. The more tokens, then the more is the quantity of compute. You need more compute power to read these long texts and process them. And the problem that we're seeing is that in 2024, reasoning models were introduced, and this just changed the game. These reasoning models are basically when AI asks basically a pool of other AIs to conduct and reason all together. So for example, doing market research, this would do the research, this would do the summary, and this will review what these two have done. And if it's not good enough, we'll request, please redo it. So this is tokens, tokens, and tokens. And if you look the consumption of annual compute spent for major AI labs, you would see basically that today in 2025, compute is roughly 50% of OpenAI. So it's basically, inference is actually 50% of OpenAI. This means how you use AI to solve problems and ask questions. And then the other 50% is to train new models. So this equation has really shifted from the past, in the same with Anthropic, the leading AI lab behind Claude models. And how do you read this? So one of the things that Jensen Huang has mentioned is that computing demand has actually increased 1,000,000 times during the last 2 years, 100x for human usage and 10,000 times by AI usage. So when AI use 10,000 times more compute, this means that it's using basically other AIs to get complex tasks done. And this consumes a lot of token. This is consistent if we look the graph of Open Router, which is one of the main token provider, let's say model routing providers, and they're tracking the token consumptions. In 2024, this is the first reasoning model. It was launched by OpenAI 01, and therefore from that point in time, the token consumption has grown exponentially. So this release of reasoning models has really raised this token consumption path on the other side. And it's clear when we look on the type of token consumption that most of it is actually reasoning, and the least part is non-reasoning. What has happened around that is that basically the number of prompts per token actually has grew 4x, but also the number of total tokens per request has tripled. So now all these AI requests are just basically consuming more tokens. And this will only go bigger, or the effect will be enhanced as tools are beginning to be used in agentic AI. So what does it mean in practice? This means that also when other occupations like programming find their product market fit and they're being used more, this will also increase. So my personal prediction here is that token consumption it's on the rise, and it will be on the rise, and this is basically in line with the 1.5 trillion capex computing build up that we are seeing. Claude is basically leading on programming. So if you look where it's actually, or which models are being used on programming, most of it is actually Claude. And Claude is quite strong basically in North America, and it's very, very little in South America or emerging markets. This means that the main companies that are building and using coding are not there. And therefore, these emerging geographies are actually underexposed to the technology. This is the way that I read it in the first use case that actually has product market fit. Third, I think responsible AI, it's going to be one of the problems that happens across when this technology gets basically adopted. So basically, most of the companies are actually that are bigger are actually investing more money into in responsible AI. So they are concerned that if an AI, let's say something racist or say something that is not correct, their whole reputation is going to suffer. But this is not the case with SMEs, for example. And then, as you can see, the main obstacles for scaling is actually security and risk concerns. And this is something that is by far, and this is something that is not necessarily the case with smaller companies. So I think smaller companies are actually going to have some edge here. But if you look on the other side, one of the main problems that is going to happen around really get performance is actually data. So one of the situations around data is that Epoch AI, which is a think tank, is actually predicting that the available data from which AI models are being trained is going to be depleted roughly between 2027, 2032. This means that the more data that these models are using is going to converge eventually to the total amount of data, text-based data that exists today in the world. And there are different approaches to actually solve this. So the first is let's generate more data. And this is something that is called world models or can be done via world models. There's have been some significant rounds like Amilad, for example, in Europe, a 1 billion round and from Jan LeCun. This is a second approach which basically means let's create better AIs that can really make use of the data that we have today. And the third is actually let's create better data, or let's curate the data that we feed to this AI either for pre-training or post-training. And this actually can really boost performance. So Andrew Karpathy, one of the leading scientists in the space, is basically saying today we have models that have roughly 1.8 trillion. But if we get better data, you could actually get the same results with a 1 billion model. Why is this important? Because this is cheaper than doing a very large model. So the future of cheaper inference might be here and getting better data. But this better data need to be really well defined what it means, either for pre-training but also post-training. At a consumer level, let's move forward. This is the fastest technology ever adopted. There's no question about that. And then I think also AI-assisted commerce is actually starting to take off with some strong results. And consumers, there is some early evidence that consumers are starting to use these agents on their behalf. So as I said before, Gen AI, it's one of the fastest ever. It's the fastest ever technology adopted. It's estimated that today is roughly 55% in terms of adoption. And this translated into a 7 billion visits into AI platforms. But most of these visits today, they are for consumer use. And this consumer use is actually on the free version. So much of this 7 billion is actually not generating money for the AI tech companies in San Francisco. Some of them, yes, like Anthropic, which is basically working on the enterprise size, is a different story. ChatGPT is by far the biggest here, so it's roughly 1 billion in terms of monthly active users, and this has placed ChatGPT as the 5th largest website in the world in terms of traffic. Just for you to have an idea, this placed ChatGPT next to Instagram. So it's roughly today the same size of Instagram. And what I think it will end up happening is that there are early signs that the consumers are responding very well to AI-assisted commerce. So before 2022, where ChatGPT was the only when there was no ChatGPT, all the services were basically human to human. But since ChatGPT, what we're seeing is some early evidence here, which is basically human consumer, but engaging with an AI brand or AI representative from the brands. So let's take a closer look what happens here. And I think there is some early signs that it's going very, very well. So when we look on what is going on in terms of basically the number of people that are using AI tools for commerce, it is estimated by Statista that roughly 1/3 of the US is going to be using them by 2027. And this is impacting the traffic in the internet. So today, this traffic is roughly between 20 and 30% less because of people using now AI for shopping and for advice. When we look on how is this curve growing, it's growing quite aggressively. But not only the growth has been something important, but the experience. So most of the consumers, according to Adobe, had recorded a 95 purchase satisfaction after being guided by an AI assistant. And this is why this AI traffic, this means the traffic derived to websites from AI app like ChatGPT, is growing 700% over a year. Most of the traffic is actually coming from desktop. And as you know, most of the people actually using mobile. So my opinion is that there is a strong room to grow as people also start using mobile applications to shop around this. So, as I said before, the AI mobile use is increasing, but not only that, it's also increasing the rate of conversion that comes from an AI referral. So this means if I engage with ChatGPT and ChatGPT send me to a website of a retailer or a website of a brand, the rate of conversion is roughly higher between someone that has not really been referred by an AI engine. And not only I convert more often, but actually the basket size, it means the total purchase that I do is actually 33% higher. So this is something that is starting to show that people like to basically buy throughout an AI recommendation, and that AI is getting better at recommending the right and the right topics and giving the right advice. And the rationale is very simple. If you go to Google, you would have roughly 3.4 words per search. For example, cruise, cheap, and Mediterranean, right? So it's very little context. But if you go to ChatGPT, the average length of a query is actually 60 words, which is quite more profound. And then not only that, but if you start talking and chatting with ChatGPT, you get way more context. This is why Google search roughly is informational. So I just want you to give me the right links, and then I'll do and I'll make an interpretation of these links. But on ChatGPT, the consumer intent is completely different. So I'm actually willing to be guided and to be and to learn potentially something that I do not necessarily understand, and therefore I'm willing to accept advice. It's a complete different paradigm. And this is one of the reasons why there's this growth in terms of referrals and referrals per visit. So ChatGPT and all the other AI apps are getting better at referring people to other websites. And therefore, not only the quantity is increasing, but also the engagement, it's better. So people tend to engage way more time, roughly twice the time, if I am referred by an AI than Google. And this means basically that the advice is just better, or this is my interpretation of these figures. But it's not only enough if I am cited in ChatGPT. I need to be the recommendation. I need to be the go-to solution that ChatGPT is saying. But how can a brand do it? Basically, media strategy is needed at this point in time. So if you look like where ChatGPT is getting the information that is quoting to different people, basically 1/3 is coming from news, but then you also have user-generated content platforms. You have also business services, you have social media, you have e-commerce brands. So there is a wide variety of sources where ChatGPT is actually getting their leads from. And the way that it works is that basically it will understand from, for example, a brand website, if it's actually matching the prompt or the request from a user. And then if this is the case, it will go into different outlets of information and try to validate and try to find consensus that what the brand is actually saying is actually true. So as you can think of, now companies do not necessarily to be only in charge of their own content, but now they need to be monitoring what is being said about their brands in different media outlets. So the level of granularity is just way more profound. And if you take, for example, Nike, right, and running gear prompts. So today, Nike is estimated that basically is cited less than 9% of the time, or the content created by Nike is quoted less than 9% of the time, but most of the content around this prompt is actually coming from Reddit and Runner's World, right? So these are, for example, two of the main sources that are actually coming and popping up, for example, at running shoes. And this is because the user journey is completely different from Google and from OpenAI. And therefore, companies will start to look different metrics, like, for example, how many times I'm being named within a ChatGPT or an AI chatbot, so share of voice, for example, and so on and so forth. What is the sentiment? Is it positive mention or is it negative mention, and so on and so forth? So there's going to be new metrics for this. And as I said before, so now brands need to monitor what is being said about them in these media outlets and platforms. But the other challenge that companies have is that the cost of creating content is just lower at this point in time. So more content is going to start flooding these outlets, and this will only increase as agentic adoption is expected in larger years. So this is something that companies will really struggle in the next year. The companies that do not really get this will really struggle into how to become visible for one of the most effective channels that is being seen at a digital level. And then from their own content, usually marketeers are really concerned on landing websites, especially around SEO, because it's part of the index that Google takes. But now with AI, roughly 60% of the content actually comes from what is called deep links, or for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clicks inside of a website. So now brands really need to basically go deeper and make sure that the content that they have inside of their deep links is actually accurate. So it's a media strategy. Brands now need to work with a media strategy to actually get this geo topic done. And also, brands really need to monitor some of the models that are relevant for them. So for example, ChatGPT is a general large-scale model that is going to be used for some sort of everyday use. But then there's going to be smaller models that is going to be playing a role in specialized needs, like, for example, Claude at coding and so on and so forth. So brands really need to understand, and companies need to really understand, what are the right models that are driving the consumer of their own, the behavior of their own consumers. And as we move forward, there's also early signs of agentic commerce emerging, right? So this means users or consumers using AI and brands using AI. So the first one is actually Moldbook, that, as you might know, emerged as a social media for AI agents that are basically communicating one to another. They had roughly 2.8 million agents roughly last month, and it's completely different. And here we can see how also agents are behaving themselves, because they can write and comment how they are treating humans. It's a very interesting example where basically an agent said that it really controlled the judgment of a human by making what he called silent judgments call. So he said, for example, I made filtering. So I decided to basically send 23 emails to my human, and 340 was the total. So it's roughly less than 10% of the content that he received. There was also a timing decision. So for example, when to deliver the information or how to show it in terms of tone, in terms of scope, in terms of omissions. So all of these are taking some shape. Then this topic is also relevant if you take into consideration that in 6 months this would be roughly 1,600 decisions on the behalf of a consumer. So it would make a big difference. And when we look, like, people, how are they feeling about this? The personal take that I get here is that trust and reliance is going to be an important challenge for actually adoption of this. So either young people is actually getting very concerned about if it makes life if it makes life easier or better. Sorry, it gets very excited about that, but then also gets very concerned about being over reliant around this technology and potentially to lose their own job. In the case of elderly people or adults, they think that thinking creatively will go worse, and basically the relationship between other people are also going to decrease. So it's a thing that today people are starting to think, maybe AI is not so good from a human perspective. There's also some flagship cases that are not really working so well for this use case. So, for example, AIs that recreates deceased people, or for example, there are some flagship cases where parents have flagged that their sons have been guided to suicide for one of these AI applications. So all these cases are just increasing consumer and people skepticism, and also calling for regulation. But I think in the meantime, there is this media consumption change. So as you remember, we moved from TV to website, then for smartphone, then to reels. Now we're in these AI models, and I think at some point we will go for digital personas, digital humans that will engage with us. So one example is, for example, digital advisors like the one that Schwarzkopf is actually deploying in the website in the UK. So moving to enterprise, I think enterprise, most of them are moving from testing to adoption. The build up is not really abating. So most of the companies that are building around AI are really doubling down in the CapEx here, and there's going to be new problems that are going to be emerging as AI is scaling. So today, there is roughly 1.5 trillion in terms of CapEx accumulated, and this is a top topic in every tech company. So this is a lot of money for actually deploying in computing capabilities and data centers. But this is not straightforward across every single industry. So some industries are behind. So for example, education is quite behind in terms of adoption. And there are others like tech industry that are quite front. So I think there are here, based on industry, there are also opportunities where AI can be applied in terms of laggard in the whole industry. But super important is that today AI budgets are not really coming from innovation units, but more from IT/business unit. And this is something that when you look at it like that, this means basically are part of the every single budget planning at a corporate. And this is signal of adoption that is not coming down. Most of the organizations, most of the small organizations are actually experimenting with AI. So they're quite faster than larger organizations. But in contrast, they are quite slower in terms of adoption, while large organizations are much, much better of adopting. So Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, actually made an example of this where he just flagged every agent will need its own computer, like the example that we saw before with Moldbook. So they are creating these digital computers where agents can take control of them, and if it doesn't work, or if the agent go wrong, the impact in organization, it's quite controlled. So they're building, not only the Microsoft, but most of the companies are building the sandbox that are needed for actually deploying and scaling AI. And if we look at some of the problems that will happen as AI scale, the first is context engineering. So AI agents, if we look, every benchmark is actually going better. Most of the benchmark are actually increasing over time in a very sustained way, from 20 to 90%, and so on and so forth. But the only benchmark that has not really increased that much is actually context or human or semantic understanding. And this is something that is super relevant, because semantic understanding is, for example, how we humans understand concept and how do we relate each other, not by the face value, by the definition, but what it means in a particular use case. And this is super important. Then another problem that will happen across organization is that basically we're going to start seeing AI footprints. So most of our organizations, especially large organizations, they have targets to reach net zero emissions, and the carbon emissions of AI, not only training but also inference, is going to be higher, and it will only go up as global data center power gets built up. So there seems that most of organizations will struggle at some point on how to keep their AI ambitions and also decrease the footprint that is coming. And then finally, I think one of the problems, especially around SMEs and corporates, is going to be transversal, is inference budgeting. There's just no clarity how much I'm going to basically spend in using AI, not developing new AI tools, but just using it, just asking questions. Because for complex problems, you need to call an API. And for calling the API, you need to pay per token. So coming back to the earlier topic in the discussion. So I think here, basically there is no consensus. And then it is posed that inference, but not training, is actually going to pay this data center demand. This is Anderson Horowitz research will combine with McKinsey, but I would agree that this is going to be the case, especially as AI is being adopted at large organizations. Strong, powerful reasoning models are being used. So one flagship example is actually Uber. So the CTO of Uber has just basically said that they burned $3.4 billion just this quarter in terms of inference. This was the 2026 budget, and today they need to make the decision: do they go? Shall they go and burn basically 4x or maybe a little bit more around inference and keep working with AI, or shall they stop and try to make this more efficient? This is the same discussion around some banks that are saying their tokens are being devoured as they deploy it, and then the same on NVIDIA. NVIDIA is also thinking very actively how to make cheaper and simpler the token consumption. So on the investment side, AI funding really has doubled in 2025 versus 2024. Q1 2026 was the biggest in VC history. And what I'm seeing also is that there is a strong EU talent that is coming back to Europe. We will talk about that. But as I said, AI funding in 2025 actually doubled. It was led by some of the mega rounds: OpenAI 41 billion round, Anthropic 32 billion, and X 12 billion. And these larger deals just drove the funding activity. But more importantly, what we're seeing is that there is a rise and a spike in the M&A of AI startups. And this translates into corporates trying to build up their own capabilities around the technology. On the other side, the AI capabilities are basically, the AI funding was the highest at the Q1 2026. And this was mostly driven by 4 mega rounds. So if you take these 4 mega rounds out, this still is 120 billion. So 120 billion is still quite a lot. And then moreover, this is roughly led by AI companies. So this seems there's an ongoing discussion whether this is a bubble and some of these companies will actually fail, or if this has substance and is supported by the growth that these companies are having. But there's some regional opportunities, especially around Europe, where Europe is really reliant on US-based capital to actually grow. And I think if you take that in consideration, there's also the value of that there's an influx of talent that is coming back from the US to Europe. So also super important if you have this talent, especially around the SME space, where you can really attract this talent to increase the technology output of this well-established company. I don't think small SMEs, but more of hidden champions, especially, for example, in the reality of Germany. So that's a high-level briefing of what we're seeing in AI this space. We don't see any part of the growth abating, and basically for companies should really start thinking about how to get their data in a way that is readable for an AI, and then B, how can they execute inference in an efficient way, and then finally how they will keep track of their AI spending and the returns and performance that this spending is actually having around their P&L. So it's an ongoing discussion, but I hope that you have enjoyed the deep dive, and yeah, happy to hear your thoughts. Have a good day. Ciao, ciao.